On this path we call life, being disliked is not a failure. It's often the cost of being real. At some point, we all learn that no matter how kind, skilled, or genuine we are, someone will misunderstand us, undervalue us, or quietly dismiss us. And that's okay, because the goal was never to be liked by everyone. It was to become someone we can respect in silence. You don't need the room to clap when you walk in. You need the room to pause when you speak. You don't need to be adored. You need to be undeniable. This is where Stoic philosophy meets modern reality. In a world hungry for validation, your refusal to beg for it becomes your quiet power. And when you stop trying to be agreeable and start becoming grounded, people shift. Not because they're told to, but because they feel it. In this video, we explore how to earn deep, lasting respect without ever needing to be liked. We'll walk through the principles that create presence, emotional sovereignty, and silent strength. If you're ready to stop performing and start leading with quiet clarity, subscribe now and share your story below. Your turning point might just be someone else's mirror. 1. Walk away when you're not valued. There's a moment in every life where staying silent feels heavier than walking away. Not because you're angry, not because you want attention, but because you finally understand your presence has been taken for granted. That moment doesn't come with warning signs or dramatic endings. It arrives quietly, like the last time someone interrupted you mid-sentence and you realized they weren't listening. They never were. And still, you stayed. Out of habit, out of fear, out of hope that something might change. But it doesn't. Because what you tolerate, you teach. And what you stay for, you validate. I know this not from theory, but from experience. I once worked in an environment where I gave more than was ever asked. Long nights, thoughtful work, loyalty no one demanded, but I offered anyway. And for a while, I believed it would be seen. But when praise was handed out, my name never came up. When raises were given, I was passed over. And when I finally gathered the courage to speak, my concerns were met with polite nods and forgotten promises. So I stopped speaking. And then I did the quietest, strongest thing I've ever done. I left. No fight, no outburst. Just a simple, intentional goodbye. That decision changed everything. Not because it made them regret losing me, but because it reminded me I was never meant to beg for space in places I had to shrink to stay in. Walking away didn't cost me power. It returned it. I stopped explaining my worth and started protecting it. I learned that emotional independence isn't detachment. It's choosing peace over performance. It's understanding that when respect is no longer served, silence is not surrender. It's a strategy. This is where Stoic philosophy becomes practical. The Stoics taught that your worth is internal, untouchable, and never dependent on public applause. That your sovereignty begins the moment you stop needing others to notice you. Walking away isn't abandonment. It's the refusal to abandon yourself. When your values are violated repeatedly, staying becomes a slow erosion of your dignity. And dignity is not something you trade, not even for comfort. Too many people stay where they're not seen, in friendships that drain them, in jobs that underpay them, in rooms where their voice is background noise. And the longer you stay, the louder your silence becomes, not to them, but to yourself. That's when bitterness grows. That's when your inner strength starts whispering, you don't belong here. And the most powerful thing you can do in that moment is not to raise your voice, but to remove your presence. That is quite powerful. That is clarity in motion. There is no revenge in walking away. Only a return to self-respect. You don't need to slam the door to be heard. You only need to walk through it without looking back. Because when you disappear from places that never valued you, something remarkable happens. You create space for places that will. For people who don't just tolerate your boundaries but honor them. For environments where your work is not just consumed but recognized. And most of all, for a version of yourself that no longer trades peace for proximity. So when the time comes, and it always does, don't stay just because it's familiar. Don't shrink just to keep the peace. Leave with grace, not to prove your worth, but to protect it. Your absence will echo louder than your presence ever did in the wrong room. And that echo, that silence, is the beginning of being respected, even by those who may never like you. 2. Stop explaining yourself all the time. You don't need a paragraph to justify a sentence. You don't need a backstory, to defend a boundary. The more you explain, the more you invite others to question what you never needed their permission for in the first place. In a world obsessed with validation, withholding explanation becomes a quiet act of sovereignty. And when you stop defending your decisions, something powerful happens. People either adjust to your presence or they leave. Either way, you win. There's a man who lives 2 houses down from a friend of mine. Middle-aged, calm, steady. He's lived in that neighborhood for over 20 years. Never throws parties, never joins the gossip. Once, a group of neighbors organized a weekend cleanup and invited him to join. He politely declined, said he had something else planned. That was it. No explanation. Just presence. The others didn't understand. Some assumed he was arrogant, others thought he was lazy. But weeks later, the same man quietly paid to replace the lights in the community park. No announcement, no plaque with his name, just action. That's the kind of man people don't talk over twice. They may not like him, but they respect that when he speaks, it's intentional. And when he's silent, it's not an oversight, it's a statement. Explaining too much is often mistaken as humility, but at its core, it reveals insecurity. The need to be understood, to be liked, to be seen as reasonable. It erodes your center. Because when you constantly explain yourself, you're not protecting the truth, you're performing for approval. And that performance is exhausting. The Stoics knew this. They believed that virtue is found in restraint, that a life of value doesn't require applause or applause chasers, that your choices, if rooted in principle, don't require permission. When you begin to live that way with emotional independence, you stop seeking permission to exist. You start choosing stillness over explanation. Silence becomes your gatekeeper, and presence becomes your message. You don't owe your coworkers a reason for leaving right at 5 p.m. You don't owe a family member an essay on why you don't want to discuss politics at dinner. You don't owe the group an apology for choosing solitude over the party. What you owe is clarity with yourself. When your no is clean, your energy remains unscattered. When your decisions stand without disclaimers, your confidence becomes unmistakable. The more you explain, the more power you bleed into conversations that don't deserve your truth. And over time, those explanations don't bring understanding, they bring entitlement. The more you justify, the more people assume you owe them access to your reasoning. That's not a connection, that's control. Living with restraint is not about being cold or distant. It's about choosing your battles, protecting your peace, and making your presence mean something. You weren't born to be transparent to everyone. You were born to build inner clarity so strong it doesn't shatter under misunderstanding. And when your clarity becomes stronger than your need to be liked, you start living differently. You walk into rooms more slowly. You speak less, but with more weight. You begin to understand that real power doesn't announce itself. It sets boundaries and lets the silence speak for it. The more unreadable you become, the more deliberate your presence feels. Not because you're hiding, but because you're no longer handing your thoughts to people who haven't earned the right to hear them. Restraint becomes a form of discipline. Stillness becomes a source of command. You don't need to prove your choices, you only need to live them well. And when you do, when you stop over-explaining, over-justifying, over-defending, people start to pay attention, not to what you say, but to how little you say it. That's not emptiness, that's authority. 3. Be useful, not always available. The more accessible you are, the less weight your presence carries. And when you're always available, you become background noise, familiar, convenient, forgettable. But when you move with intention, when your time is measured and your energy is disciplined, you stop being an option and start being a force. People don't respect what's easy to reach. They respect what's rare and what shows up only when it matters. There's a retired mechanic named Leon in a quiet Midwestern neighborhood, a man in his 60s with steady hands and few words. He doesn't socialize much, doesn't linger at community events, and rarely joins casual conversations at the diner. But when someone's car breaks down in the middle of a snowstorm, or when a generator won't start during a blackout, he shows up. No announcements, no fuss, just quiet presence and competent hands. He says little, works quickly, and then disappears again. People talk about Leon with a kind of reverence that others in the town don't receive. Not because he's flashy or friendly, but because he's useful and rare. They know he's not always around, but when he is, something gets fixed. And that is remembered far longer than the names of those always present, always talking, always available. This is where Stoic philosophy comes alive in practice. You are not respected for how often you show up. You are respected for what happens when you do. Presence, when diluted by frequency, loses its weight. But when it's held back by restraint and only offered with purpose, it begins to command attention. Your value increases when you stop being everywhere. Not because you're hiding, but because you're choosing. And choosing is power. We live in a world addicted to availability. Instant replies, constant visibility. People feel pressured to prove their relevance by showing up non-stop. But when you show up constantly, you become predictable. And predictability breeds complacency. Just like air, always there, barely noticed, until it's gone. The man who appears only when it matters, who gives his energy with precision, not obligation, becomes a different kind of presence. He's not just liked, he's respected. He's the one others look for when things get serious, when surface charm is useless, and only steadiness will do. To apply this, you must unlearn the idea that being liked means being present all the time. You don't need to join every conversation. You don't need to reply within seconds. You don't need to attend every gathering or solve every small problem. What you need is emotional restraint, the discipline to withhold your energy until it can actually make a difference. When your time becomes deliberate, your value becomes undeniable. Not because you said yes to everything, but because you said yes to the right things. This is how quiet power works. You don't force respect. You shape it with consistency, usefulness, and mystery. You create it by being the kind of person whose presence shifts the air, not fills the silence. You arrive not to be seen, but to make something work better. And then you leave before anyone forgets the impact. This is not manipulation, it's not coldness, it's a strategic restraint. It's choosing sovereignty over availability. And that choice, repeated over time, creates a kind of magnetism no social charm can replicate. So be useful. Let your presence solve problems. Let your energy be felt, not scattered. Show up when it matters, disappear when it doesn't. And eventually, people will come to understand you were never just there. You were the one thing they didn't realize they depended on until you were gone. That's not popularity, that's respect. And it's the kind that lasts. 4. Set boundaries without apology. Respect doesn't begin with how people treat you. It begins with what you allow. Every time you soften a no into a maybe, every time you overextend to keep the peace, every time you let someone inch past your edge because it's not a big deal, you're not keeping harmony, you're leaking sovereignty. Boundaries are not walls to keep the world out. They're doors with locks that you choose when and how to open. And once that choice becomes negotiable, your peace is no longer yours. The moment you draw a line with clarity and calm, the world starts recalibrating around you. Not because they like it, but because they sense you mean it. And that's the core of Stoic self-respect. Restraint, not reactivity. Presence, not performance. You don't shout your limits. You state them once and let silence do the rest. You don't owe anyone emotional explanations for protecting your time, your space, or your energy. If you say no, let it be full. If you decline, let it be clean. Don't turn boundaries into discussions. They're not up for debate. In a culture where over-accommodation is praised, restraint is often misread as arrogance. But setting boundaries without apology is not arrogance, it's maturity. It's the realization that emotional independence means you no longer outsource your value to how comfortable you make others feel. People who thrive on access will push, guilt, flatter, or question you the moment they sense hesitation. But if you hold your ground without over-explaining, you become unreadable. And that unreadability becomes your shield. Because the more predictable your tolerance is, the easier it is to exploit. There is strength in the phrase, "That doesn't work for me." Nothing more. No list of reasons, no bending to soften the discomfort of others. The discomfort is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to your own clarity, to your own boundaries, to your own capacity. And the moment you decide to defend your peace without a monologue, you stop negotiating with people who only listen when you justify yourself. The Stoics weren't emotionless. They were disciplined. They knew that power doesn't require force. only certainty. And boundaries built on quiet certainty last longer than boundaries drawn in rage. The louder you defend your limits, the more others will test them. But the quieter and firmer you are, the less they try. That is presence. That is restraint. And that is how people begin to sense your depth without you having to prove it. Protecting your peace doesn't make you difficult. It makes it clear. And clarity is rare in a world where everyone's trying to be everything to everyone. When you stop over-explaining your limits, you allow others to meet you where you are or walk away. And either outcome brings peace. Because those who respect boundaries stay with integrity, those who don't leave with noise, and both reveal who actually deserves access. Boundaries, when held with consistency, do more than protect. They communicate. Without saying much, they say, I value my energy. I move with intention. I don't trade comfort for approval. And I don't entertain access without alignment. You won't need to repeat them often. When people feel the quiet finality in how you speak, they remember. Not because you demanded respect, but because you stopped asking for permission to deserve it. And that's the shift, from seeking acceptance to embodying authority. From defending your space to owning it. You don't need to be harsh to be firm. You don't need to be aggressive to be clear. Just grounded. Just still. Just unmistakably sure of where you begin and where others end. Say it once, mean it, then move on. Let your boundaries walk ahead of you. Let them speak when you don't. Let them do the sorting so you don't have to. Because when your peace becomes non-negotiable, your presence becomes undeniable. 5. Control your emotions in public. Not every emotion deserves an audience. Some of the most powerful moments of control happen when no one else even realizes the battle you just won. The battle to stay calm when everything in you wants to react. In public, power isn't in the comeback. It's in the stillness that disorients those expecting an explosion. Anyone can raise their voice. Few can hold their silence without folding. That's where real strength lives. I remember standing in a meeting room years ago, being questioned by someone younger, louder, and clearly looking to make a point at my expense. He interrupted me twice, challenged my logic, and tried to make me look incompetent in front of the room. I felt my jaw tighten. My thoughts raced. That old instinct to fire back, to reclaim ground with sharper words, was right there, ready. But I didn't. I breathed. Sat still. Let the silence stretch. Then I replied, not with force, but with clarity. No raised voice, no emotion, just precision. And in that moment, something shifted. The room, once leaning toward chaos, leaned back into calm. Because when you don't give them the emotional fuel they're hoping for, the fire dies in their hands. Stoicism teaches that emotions are natural, but reactions are optional. And in public, the ability to pause before you respond becomes your greatest source of emotional independence. It's not about suppressing what you feel. It's about disciplining when and how you express it. Most people think control is about hiding anger. But real control is when your presence says everything your outburst would have, only more sharply and without the mess. When you become known as the person who doesn't flinch, who doesn't take the bait, who listens while others unravel, you shift the dynamic. Not because you overpower, but because you don't need to. People respect restraint. They trust it, not because it's quiet, but because it signals depth. And in the chaos of public life, at work, in relationships, even in casual conversation, the one who stays anchored sets the tone. That's presence. That's sovereignty. You don't win by reacting faster. You win by choosing not to react when the world expects you to. You win by mastering the pause. To apply this is simple, but not easy. You'll need to become more aware of your own emotional triggers. The tones that irritate you, the looks that provoke you, the words that scratch at your pride. And when they come, because they will, you don't fight them. You observe them. You step back internally and remind yourself, not everything needs my reaction. Not here. Not now. Then, when you do respond, it's not reflex, it's direction. It's a choice made from discipline, not emotion. This kind of self-control isn't just about dignity. It's about positioning. Because in every room, people are watching, not just what you say, but how you hold yourself. And when they see someone calm in the storm, unshaken by ego games or emotional pressure, they don't just hear you, they start to respect you. You become undeniable not by being louder, but by being unmovable. And that stays with them. Long after the moment ends, they'll remember the person who didn't lose composure. The person who responded with quiet strength while others scrambled. That memory becomes your reputation. That restraint becomes your gravity. And that gravity is what sets true leaders apart from those who simply want to be right. So don't waste your peace trying to defend your pride. Don't give your power to anyone who hasn't earned the right to disturb it. In public, composure is not performance, it's protection. Hold it like armor, speak only when it adds weight, and let your silence remind the world that real power never begs to be seen. It simply is. 6. Let your work speak louder than your personality. You don't need to be charming to be respected. You need to be consistent. You don't have to light up every room you enter. It's enough that systems run smoother when you're around. In a world that rewards performance over substance, being quietly competent is often underestimated until it isn't. And that's the point. Let them overlook you. Let them assume you're ordinary. Because when it matters, what you deliver will speak louder than any introduction ever could. There's a woman who works in a regional hospital, a night shift nurse named Marla. She doesn't laugh the loudest in the break room. She's not the one decorating her workstation or posting motivational quotes. She moves quietly, almost like a shadow. But on nights when the ER overflows and the system buckles, it's Marla they call. She doesn't panic. She doesn't brag. She acts. Charts get updated. Patients get stabilized. Younger nurses anchor themselves to her calm. By morning, the crisis is handled, the floor is clean, and Marla is already gone. No applause, no socializing, no announcement. But everyone knows, when things fall apart, she's the one holding the pieces together. Not because she talks the most, but she shows up and performs when it counts. That is Stoic presence in its purest form. No need for recognition, no craving for approval. Just quiet sovereignty in action. Letting your work speak louder than your personality doesn't mean you suppress who you are. It means you understand where true influence begins. Not in charisma, not in likability, but in the results, in follow-through, in the weight of your consistency. Because results, unlike charm, are undeniable. This is especially true in environments where noise is often mistaken for contribution. The person who talks the most in meetings isn't always the one moving the work forward. The one who gets credit often isn't the one who built the foundation. But eventually, those who pay attention, and they always do, begin to notice the pattern. Who actually delivers? Who solves problems? Who doesn't collapse when pressure rises? And when that pattern emerges, it's no longer your words they remember, it's your impact. Stoic philosophy reminds us that excellence is a personal standard, not a public performance. You don't need to impress. You need to improve. You don't need to perform for praise. You need to persist for the sake of your own integrity. And once you anchor into that mindset, something shifts. You no longer need to sell yourself. You simply do the work, cleanly, consistently, without noise. And over time, that quiet standard becomes your identity. When others look to you, not for entertainment, but for reliability, you hold a different kind of respect. Not the fleeting admiration of popularity, but the durable weight of usefulness. You become the one people trust when talk fails. And trust, not popularity, is what influence is built on. You weren't meant to be everyone's favorite. You were meant to be steady, capable, grounded. And the more grounded you are, the less you need to raise your voice. In a world full of noise, restraint becomes rare. Let others chase applause. Let others advertise their worth. You don't have to. Your work will outlast their words. And when it does, they won't remember how quiet you were. They'll remember how strong you were when things got real. So keep building, keep showing up. Not to be seen, but to be effective. Because long after charisma fades, competence remains. And the one who lets their work speak for them never has to explain who they are. The results say it all. 7. Be consistent, not pleasing. People may smile at you when you please them, but they respect you when they can count on you. Pleasing gives you applause in the moment. Consistency gives you a name that holds weight long after you've left the room. In a culture where likability is confused with value, it's tempting to adjust yourself constantly. Soften your tone, change your stance, say yes when your gut says no, all to remain agreeable. But what you trade for that approval is far greater than what you gain. Because when you reshape yourself for every room, You leave none of yourself behind. The Stoics didn't seek to be palatable. They sought to be principled. That means saying the same thing whether it's praised or ignored. That means acting with the same intention, whether the audience cheers or walks away. Consistency doesn't mean rigidity. It means your values are not up for negotiation just because the setting changes. When you're consistent, people may not always agree with you, but they'll know where you stand. And that certainty becomes your presence. It becomes a signal that you can be trusted, not because you please, but because you don't sway with the wind. There's a silent kind of influence that only consistency builds. It's the influence that doesn't beg to be liked. It earns its place by never breaking character, because in the long run, people don't follow those who flatter them. They follow those who ground them. And that grounding begins with you refusing to perform. It begins when your restraint keeps you from jumping through emotional hoops just to be liked. When your responses stop being tailored to gain favor and start reflecting your core, that's when the shift happens. Emotional independence means not letting the moods, opinions, or preferences of others dictate how you speak or behave. You don't need to be reactive to be real. You don't need to shapeshift to survive. The more rooted you are, the less explaining you do. And over time, people notice. They may not always say it. They may even resist it at first, but they start adjusting to your rhythm. Because consistency, though quiet, has gravity. And that gravity pulls attention without asking for it. When you prioritize being pleasing, your power becomes conditional. Conditional on approval, conditional on reaction, conditional on external warmth. But when you prioritize being consistent, your power becomes internal. You become untouchable in the best way, not distant, but whole. And that wholeness is what earns you respect. Because people don't admire those who try to be everything. They admire those who are fully themselves, especially when it's not convenient. Stoic philosophy isn't about detachment from others. It's about anchoring yourself so fully that others can't derail you. That's where consistency meets resilience. That's where trust begins. Not because you said all the right things, but because you said the same thing even when no one clapped. So, speak calmly, even when provoked. Hold your line, even when questioned. And walk the same way in quiet rooms as you would in loud ones. Because in the end, pleasing gives you attention. But consistency earns you a legacy. You don't have to be the favorite. You just have to be the one they remember when things get real. Not for what you said to win them over, but for what you never changed just to be liked. That is an undeniable strength. And it doesn't just command respect, it keeps it. Respect isn't given to the loudest voice or the most agreeable face. It's given to those who move with clarity, who know what they stand for, and who no longer shrink to fit where they don't belong. In this world, where validation is handed out in likes and approval is mistaken for connection, the real power belongs to those who walk in silence and still carry weight. You don't have to explain everything. You don't have to be everywhere. And you don't have to be liked to be respected. What matters is presence with purpose, boundaries without apology, and a kind of quiet strength that outlasts noise. When you practice restraint, when you remain unrateable yet reliable, when your reactions are disciplined and your values are consistent, you stop chasing recognition and begin drawing reverence. That's the way of the Stoic. Not distant, just grounded, not passive, just powerful in stillness. So if any of this spoke to you, I invite you to share your story below. Share a moment when you stopped performing and started standing firm. Not for praise, but for peace. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if nothing else, let this be your quiet promise to yourself, to live with sovereignty, and to never again trade your dignity for approval.